Chapter 1. The Quiet Before Christmas. The scent of roasted garlic and rosemary clung to the air as Marcus slid the heavy roasting pan back into the oven. A faint hiss followed as butter dripped onto the hot tray, releasing a wave of fragrance that should have felt comforting, festive. Instead, the sound echoed like a reminder of everything fragile holding his life together. He wiped his hands on a towel and glanced toward the living room. Sarah sat curled on the couch, legs tucked under her, her eyes glowing in the light of her phone screen. Her thumbs moved rapidly, her expression shifting every few seconds, smiling faintly at one moment, then furrowing into a secret frown the next. Marcus leaned against the kitchen doorway, towel still in hand, and watched her in silence. 15 Christmases together, he thought. 15 years of dinners, traditions, laughter. He could still picture their first one. Cheap paper crowns from a cracker, mismatched dishes, the small apartment that smelled of pine and burnt cookies. She had looked at him then like he was her entire world. Now she didn't even look up when he cleared his throat. "Turkey should be ready in about an hour," he said, keeping his tone light. Sarah murmured without lifting her gaze. A faint chuckle escaped her, directed not at him, but at whatever appeared on the glowing screen. Marcus turned back to the counter, pulling out the cutting board. He began slicing carrots into uniform sticks, the knife rhythm steady, almost meditative. He told himself he was preparing not just food but armor. Dinner tonight wasn't going to be simple. It hadn't been for years. The family would come. Her father Richard with his booming opinions, her mother Eleanor with her quiet disapproval wrapped in a polite smile, and Olivia, her younger sister, whose sharp tongue always found Marcus an easy target. They would gather at his table, eat his food, and judge him in silence between the clinking of silverware. But he'd endured worse, and tonight he would endure again. "Do you need any help?" Sarah asked suddenly, though her voice was distracted, eyes still glued to her phone. He almost laughed. "I've got it," Marcus replied, arranging the carrots neatly beside the sprigs of thyme. She nodded absently, already back in her private world. The knife paused mid-slice. Marcus's eyes lingered on her. He noticed the way her wine glass was already half empty, the delicate stem catching the light. He noticed the way she angled the phone slightly away from him whenever he walked by, as though guarding it. 15 years ago, she used to read her texts aloud to him, giggling about friends and work gossip. Now, silence draped itself between them, thick and suffocating. He took a slow breath and forced himself back into motion. Chop, chop, chop. The sound of steel on wood filled the room. "Remember last year?" Marcus said after a moment, almost as though speaking to himself. "You burned the potatoes. We had to eat them half raw. That had been funny then." They had laughed. Even her family had chuckled at the sight of Sarah's sheepish face. Sarah glanced up, eyes unfocused, and gave a small smile. "Yeah," she said. Then her phone vibrated again, and the smile vanished, replaced by a frown she tried to hide. Marcus studied her in silence before turning back to the roast. He basted the golden skin carefully, listening to the sizzle. The kitchen smelled like Christmas ought to smell. Savory, rich, promising. Yet beneath it lay something sour, a flavor he couldn't cook out no matter how carefully he seasoned. His mind wandered as he cleaned up the counter. 15 years. A home they'd built, vacations, laughter, late-night talks. He had given everything. He thought of the times he stayed late at work, grinding through projects so Sarah could have the house she wanted, the car she loved driving. He thought of the times she cried in his arms, when life felt too heavy for her, and he whispered that he would carry it for both of them. And now what was left of that? A woman smiling into her wine glass at someone else's words, not his. Marcus adjusted the thermostat and returned to the table, arranging silverware with precise care. Fork, knife, spoon, polished until they gleamed. He wanted no excuses tonight. If her family came for him, as they always did, at least they would sit at a table flawless by his hands. "You're fussing too much," Sarah said absently, still not lifting her gaze. "They don't care about the cutlery." "Maybe I do," Marcus answered quietly. That drew her attention, if only briefly. She looked at him, brows slightly furrowed, as if she hadn't expected him to answer with weight. Then she shook her head and returned to her screen. Marcus let the silence fall again, heavy as snow. He moved around the dining room with calm efficiency, lighting candles, placing the wreath in the center, straightening chairs. Each action was deliberate, controlled. If he couldn't control Sarah's distance, if he couldn't control her family's disdain, at least he could control the perfection of this table. The clock ticked toward evening. Shadows stretched long across the floorboards. Marcus paused by the window, looking out at the faint twinkle of Christmas lights strung across the neighborhood. Families were gathering behind those warm windows, laughter spilling into the night. He wondered how many of those houses held secrets like his. Behind him, Sarah laughed suddenly at something on her phone, a light, almost flirtatious laugh. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his face remained calm when he turned back. "Do you want me to open another bottle of wine?" he asked. She waved a dismissive hand, not even looking up. "I'll get it later." He nodded once, though he knew she wouldn't. She hadn't lifted a finger since the morning. Not to cook, not to clean, not even to decorate. Christmas had become his holiday to keep alive. He returned to the kitchen, washed his hands, and leaned against the counter. His reflection stared back from the dark oven glass. Tired eyes, steady posture. A man who'd carried too much but refused to bend. "They think I'm weak," Marcus thought. "They've always thought that. Even her. Maybe especially her. But they've forgotten that quiet doesn't mean blind." The oven timer beeped softly, breaking his thoughts. He pulled a roast out, juices bubbling, skin perfectly crisp. He basted it one last time, satisfied with the golden sheen. His hands moved with practice skill, years of learning how to cook meals big enough to feed not just bodies but pride. From the living room, Sarah's voice carried faintly. "Yeah, I'll see you soon after tonight." Marcus froze. The words were soft, almost casual, but they pierced like a blade. When he walked in, Sarah was already tucking her phone under a cushion, her smile too quick, too rehearsed. "Who was that?" he asked, tone even. "Olivia," she answered smoothly. She wanted to know what time to come. Marcus held her gaze for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he simply nodded. "Right." He walked back into the kitchen, heart steady, not racing. He placed a roast on the counter and covered it with foil. His hands did not shake. He was calm, controlled. But inside, beneath that calm surface, something colder stirred. Chapter 2. Cracks in the facade. Morning light crept through the blinds, laying long pale stripes across the bedroom floor. Marcus stirred first, the way he always did. Old habit, built from years of early commutes and responsibility. He stretched quietly, careful not to disturb Sarah, then glanced at the clock. The alarm hadn't gone off yet, but Sarah was already awake. She was lying on her side, back turned to him, phone in hand. The glow from the screen lit her face in an unnatural pallor. Her thumbs danced quickly, pausing only long enough for her lips to curve into a faint smile or tighten into a little frown. "Morning," Marcus said, his voice low, still rough with sleep. She flinched slightly, almost guilty, before covering it with a yawn. "Morning." Her eyes darted back to the phone. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." He swung his legs off the bed, slipping into his robe. "Want coffee?" "No, I'll get mine later." She waved vaguely, her eyes already drifting back to the screen. Marcus studied her a moment longer. 15 years, and she'd never started the day without coffee. He went downstairs, set the kettle on, and filled the kitchen with the familiar hiss of steam. He busied himself with small motions, scooping grounds, rinsing mugs. The ritual steadied him. Even his unease threaded through his chest. When Sarah eventually came down, she was still glued to her phone. She breezed past him toward the cupboard, grabbed a cereal bar, and tore the wrapper with quick hands. "No breakfast?" Marcus asked. "Not hungry," she said, distracted, scrolling again. "You love breakfast." He tried for a smile. "You once told me it was your sacred meal of the day." She looked at him blankly for a moment, then shrugged. "People change, Marcus." The words landed heavier than she likely intended. Or maybe she meant them to cut. He couldn't tell anymore. By afternoon, Sarah's detachment grew sharper. She snapped when he asked if she could help with folding laundry. She rolled her eyes when he reminded her about a bill that needed paying. Every small thing he said seemed to annoy her, as though his voice itself was an inconvenience. Marcus didn't rise to it. He folded the clothes himself, smooth and neat, the way he liked. He moved through the house with calm patience, but inside he cataloged every sigh, every sideways look, every time she set her phone face down on the table whenever he walked into the room. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the windows gold, Marcus stood by the sink rinsing dishes. Sarah's voice floated faintly from upstairs, muffled at first, then growing clearer as he turned off the tap. She was in the bedroom, door ajar, phone pressed her ear. He shouldn't have lingered. He told himself that. But the tone in her voice, low, urgent, almost conspiratorial, rooted him in place. "I told you. I can't just walk away now," she was saying, her words clipped. "It has to look clean. No mess." A pause, then a laugh, soft, almost giddy. Marcus's chest tightened. "Yes, after the divorce, of course. That's the plan." He stood frozen, dish towel in hand, his pulse thudding in his ears. After the divorce. The phrase replayed, sharp and undeniable. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. 15 years. All the holidays, the anniversaries, the promises whispered in the dark. And now she was speaking casually of ending it, like it was just another chore to cross off a list. He stepped back quietly, careful not to let the floorboards creak. He returned to the kitchen and set the towel down with deliberate calm. His face remained composed, his motion steady, but his mind churned. Later, Sarah came downstairs, her expression smooth, her voice too light. "You didn't start the movie without me, did you?" Marcus looked up from the armchair, remote resting on his lap. He offered a small smile. "No, was waiting for you." She plopped down on the couch, tucking her feet under her, phone still in hand. The glow illuminated her face while she scrolled. "What were you talking about upstairs?" Marcus asked casually, as though it was an afterthought. She glanced at him too quickly. "Oh, Olivia. Just some family stuff. You know how she is." He nodded slowly. "Right." She didn't notice the way he studied her. Didn't notice the subtle shift in his eyes, the quiet resolve that had settled there. The movie played, but Sarah barely watched. She laughed at her phone more than at the screen. Marcus pretended not to see. He kept his posture relaxed, his breathing even. He sipped his drink, made idle comments about the film, let the minutes tick by. Inside, though, he was listening to every slip of her tongue, every inconsistency. He was piecing together a puzzle she didn't even know she'd spilled onto the table. When the credits rolled, Sarah stretched and yawned. "I'm going to bed early," she said, gathering her phone like a lifeline. Marcus nodded. "I'll lock up." She disappeared upstairs, leaving the faintest scent of her perfume lingering in the room. Marcus sat in silence, staring at the blank TV screen, its reflection casting him in ghostly shadow. His jaw clenched once, then relaxed. His hands folded calmly on his lap. After the divorce. The words sat cold in his chest, but his face betrayed nothing. He knew better than to confront her now. If she believed he was blind, she would keep making mistakes. And Marcus, patient, quiet Marcus, would keep watching, waiting, collecting. He turned off the lamp, the room sinking into darkness, and whispered into the silence, though no one could hear. 15 years, Sarah. You think I don't see you, but I do." He rose, checked the locks, and climbed the stairs with slow, steady steps. His mask was intact. His calm was absolute. But behind it, a storm had begun. Chapter 3, Arrival of the Family. The clock in the hallway ticked louder than usual, or maybe Marcus only imagined it that way. The roast rested beneath its foil on the counter. The vegetables steamed in serving dishes, and the table gleamed with candles flickering gently in their glass holders. Everything was in place, and still, the silence of waiting pressed on his chest. Then, at last, the doorbell rang. Sarah, who had been checking her reflection in the mirror by the stairs, perked up immediately. "That'll be them," she said, smoothing her hair and tugging at the hem of her dress. She hadn't smiled at Marcus all evening, but now her face lit up like a stage actress stepping before her audience. Marcus wiped his hands on the towel draped over his shoulder and moved toward the door, but Sarah slipped past him quickly, heels clicking on the wood. "I'll get it," she said. When she swung the door open, Richard's booming voice filled the hallway before he even stepped inside. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." Her father swept in first, a tall man with a barrel chest and the kind of presence that demanded a room take notice. His hair had gone silver at the temples, but his posture remained unbent, his confidence untouched. Behind him came Eleanor, small and trim, wrapped in a fur-lined coat, her eyes sharp even beneath the soft ringlets of her carefully set hair. And then Olivia, Sarah's younger sister, waltzed in last, smirking as though she'd been invited to a comedy show rather than Christmas dinner. "Darling, you look radiant," Eleanor said, kissing Sarah's cheek. Then her gaze flicked briefly to Marcus and softened into polite disdain. "Marcus, good to see you both," Marcus replied evenly, stepping aside. Richard clapped him on the shoulder with just enough force to make it feel like a test of strength. "Still at the same job?" "Yeah," he said with a chuckle. "What's it been now, 10 years? Must be nice, not having to chase ambition. Some men like comfort, I suppose." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, but his expression never shifted from its calm mask. "Stability has its benefits," he said. Olivia snorted and tossed her scarf onto the banister. "That's one way of putting it." Sarah laughed with her sister, the sound cutting sharper than it should have. Marcus filed the moment away. They moved into the dining room, where the candlelight gleamed off the polished silverware. Eleanor let her fingers trail across the tablecloth, checking the texture as if Marcus had bought it solely for her inspection. "Well, at least the table looks presentable this year," she said. Marcus only nodded. "I'm glad you approve." Richard lowered himself into the chair at the head of the table, though Marcus had intended that seat for himself. The older man didn't ask, he simply claimed it, as if by right. Eleanor took her place beside him, Sarah sat opposite, and Olivia sprawled casually next to her sister, pulling out her phone with little regard for manners. "So, Marcus," Richard began as Marcus poured wine for each of them, "still fixing those spreadsheets at your company? Or did they finally promote you to something grander? Assistant to the assistant manager, perhaps?" He laughed loudly at his own joke. Eleanor gave a delicate sigh. "Richard, really." But her smile betrayed her amusement. Sarah smirked into her glass. Marcus set the wine bottle down carefully, his motions precise. "I enjoy what I do," he said, voice even. "It provides for us. That's what matters." "Yes, but does it inspire you?" Olivia leaned forward, chin in her hand, eyes glittering with mischief. "Or is it just routine?" Sarah deserves someone who can give her more than routine. The comment slid across the table like a blade, sharp and deliberate. Sarah said nothing, only sipped her wine, eyes fixed on the flickering candle. Marcus smiled faintly, though his fingers curled slightly against his thigh beneath the table. "Routine can be dependable," he said softly. "It keeps the world turning." Dinner began with the first course, soup Marcus had prepared with roasted parsnips and cream. He ladled it carefully into bowls, serving each guest before himself. Richard lifted his spoon, tasted, and hummed. "Not bad," he said as though surprised. "Better than last year." "It's very rustic," Eleanor added, dabbing her lips delicately, though perhaps a bit heavy on the salt. Marcus nodded, unfazed. "I'll keep that in mind." Olivia pushed her bowl aside after 2 spoonfuls. "Do you ever let Sarah cook, Marcus? Or do you insist on doing it all, so she can't show you up?" Sarah laughed lightly at that, though it carried no warmth. "Trust me, Olivia. He likes playing chef. I don't argue." Richard raised his glass. "At least she's got you trained, Marcus." A man in the kitchen, apron on, serving his wife's family. What more could a modern girl ask for? The laughter that followed filled the room, suffocating in its weight. Marcus lifted his own glass, sipped, and let the burn of wine steady him. His face remained calm, his tone measured, but inside, each slight was recorded, etched with the precision of a ledger. When the main course arrived, Eleanor's critiques grew sharper. "The turkey is a touch dry, don't you think?" she murmured to Sarah, not quite quietly enough. Your grandmother always said the secret was constant basting. But then, Marcus wouldn't know family traditions, would he? Sarah nodded, almost conspiratorially, her smile hidden behind her glass. Richard stabbed at the roasted carrots. At least he's consistent, reliable, predictable. Nothing wrong with that, though some might call it dull. Better dull than chaotic, Marcus replied smoothly, surprising them with his calm retort. Olivia arched a brow, lips curving. Ooh, Marcus has a spine tonight. Careful, Sarah, or he might start standing up for himself. Her laughter rang out, high and cruel. Marcus simply smiled. I'll take that under advisement. By the time dessert arrived, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken judgment. Eleanor complimented Sarah on her dress 3 separate times, remarking how stunning she looked and how lucky Marcus was. Richard toasted to Sarah's endless patience, praising her for putting up with so much. Olivia suggested Sarah deserved a medal or maybe a vacation from all this domestic monotony. Through it all, Marcus sat steady, spooning pudding into bowls, nodding politely, smiling faintly at their barbs. Outwardly, he was unshaken. Inwardly, every word was catalogued, every insult placed neatly into the file he kept in the quiet chambers of his mind. He didn't defend himself beyond the smallest quips, didn't argue, didn't rise. That was what they wanted, to see him flinch, to see him snap. Instead, he remained calm. They mistook it for weakness, and Marcus let them. Chapter 4. The Dinner Table Pressure. The dining room glowed softly under the chandelier, the candles flickering along the length of the table. The roast sat in the center, carved and steaming, vegetables arranged in careful symmetry around it. Marcus had placed the serving dishes like chess pieces, each in its proper position. He stood back for a moment, surveying the scene, and then took his seat. Richard, of course, had claimed the head of the table, the spot Marcus had once quietly reserved for himself. Eleanor sat prim and upright beside him, a porcelain queen surveying her kingdom. Sarah had chosen the chair directly across from Marcus, though she barely met his eyes. Olivia leaned lazily in her seat, chin propped in her palm, phone resting face down beside her plate, as though ready to be snatched up again at a moment's notice. Marcus poured the wine with a steady hand. The deep red liquid glugged into crystal glasses, catching the candlelight like blood. Well, Richard announced, raising his glass. To family, to tradition, to Sarah, Eleanor added, her smile softening toward her daughter. She holds everything together so beautifully. Marcus raised his own glass last, the faintest curve at his lips. To Sarah, he echoed. They drank. The clinking of crystal sounded delicate, but beneath it lay something brittle, ready to shatter. Conversation began politely enough, as it always did, the opening moves of a familiar game. Eleanor asked after Sarah's work, lavishing praise on her daughter's dedication and strength. Richard spoke of business contacts, investments, the circles of influence he navigated with ease. Olivia filled the silences with sly remarks, half-jokes that carried too much bite to be harmless. Marcus listened, spoke when spoken to, but mostly let the tide of conversation wash over him. It didn't take long for the barbs to begin. You're lucky Sarah stayed with you this long, Richard said with a chuckle, stabbing at a slice of turkey. Not many women would tolerate a man who's so steady. That's the word, isn't it? Steady. Eleanor dabbed her lips with her napkin, adding gently, dependable, predictable, though sometimes predictability can be a little stifling. Olivia smirked across the table. Boring, you mean? Marcus let the words hang in the air before answering. He leaned back slightly, fork poised in his hand. Steady, dependable, predictable. I'll take those over reckless and unreliable any day. At least no one wonders if dinner will be on the table. Sarah gave a short laugh, but it ended in her wine glass. She poured herself another, though she hadn't finished the first. Eleanor tilted her head, studying Marcus as though he were a curious specimen under glass. But don't you ever dream of more, Marcus? A bigger role, more recognition, something to show off? Sarah's done so well with her career, it must be hard to keep up. Marcus cut a small bite of turkey, chewing thoughtfully before answering. I don't measure myself by titles. If the bills are paid, if the house is warm, if the people I care for have what they need, then I'm content. Richard chuckled, shaking his head. Content. That's what men say when they've settled. You know, Marcus, I've always said Sarah could have married up. But she's loyal, I'll give her that. Stuck by you all these years. The remark hung in the air like smoke. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, reaching again for her glass. Olivia grinned. Who knows, Dad? Maybe Marcus is secretly a millionaire and just likes to play house. Marcus smiled faintly, lifting his glass. If I were, I'd still cook. It's relaxing. His calmness unsettled them more than anger ever could. The meal continued, each course another chance for critique. The potatoes are a bit firm, Eleanor remarked. The turkey's just a shade dry, Richard added. The carrots are fine, I suppose, Olivia said, smirking as she pushed them around her plate. Marcus nodded each time, acknowledging without defending, as though their words were nothing more than background noise. Sarah, meanwhile, poured yet another glass. Her cheeks had taken on a faint flush, her laughter louder now, though it often rang hollow. She avoided Marcus's eyes almost entirely, choosing instead to lock onto her sister or her wine glass. Slow down, dear, Eleanor chided gently. You'll be asleep before dessert. I'm fine, Sarah said, a little too sharply before softening her tone. Really, I'm just unwinding. Richard raised his brows, exchanging a glance with his wife. Marcus caught the look, but said nothing. The conversation shifted again, this time turning more pointed. You've got to admit, Richard said, leaning forward, you married above your station, Marcus. Sarah's always been the bright one, the ambitious one. I remember when she was a girl, she talked about traveling the world, meeting people of influence. And now, he gestured around the table, she's here. With you. In this comfortable house. Eleanor added smoothly. Of course, comfort has its place. But it's not the same as achievement. Olivia laughed outright. Translation. Sarah settled. The laughter that followed pressed down on Marcus like a heavy lid. He took a slow sip of wine, letting the taste linger. Then, with a faint smile, he set the glass down. Funny. I always thought marriage was about choosing someone you wanted to build a life with, not someone to compete with. But perhaps I'm misunderstood. For the first time that evening, silence fell. Brief thought. Then Eleanor cleared her throat delicately. Well, that's one way of looking at it. Sarah refilled her glass again. Her hand trembled just slightly as she poured. By the time the plates were cleared, the room felt smaller, the air thicker. The flicker of the candles cast long shadows across the walls, their light dancing in the strained silence. Eleanor folded her napkin neatly. At least you keep a nice home, Marcus. That much I'll give you. Olivia smirked. Yes, credit where it's due. You make a very good caretaker. Richard chuckled. Caretaker. That's perfect. Sarah provides a sparkle, and Marcus makes sure the lights stay on. A good arrangement, really. Marcus smiled faintly, though his eyes betrayed nothing. Every arrangement has its strengths, he said. Sarah, now visibly tipsy, laughed too loudly. Oh, stop. You're making it sound like I rescued him. The laughter that followed was brittle, hollow. Marcus picked up his glass, swirling the wine slowly, and thought how very much like cracks in porcelain this night had become. He did not argue. He did not flinch. He only listened, watched, and remembered. Chapter 5. The Uninvited Guest. The night had grown heavy with wine and unspoken tension. Candles flickered lower in their holders, their wax pooling like melted hours, and the air in the dining room was thick with the smell of roast and criticism. Marcus sat quietly, swirling the last of his wine, while Sarah toyed with her glass as though it were the only safe company at the table. Then the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, unexpected, slicing through the heavy quiet. Everyone looked up. Sarah's brows furrowed in confusion. Is someone else coming? She asked, almost too quickly, her voice tinged with unease. Richard set down his glass with a smile that carried something rehearsed. Right on time. Marcus glanced at him, but before he could speak, Richard was already pushing back his chair. I'll get it. His booming voice echoed through the hallway as he strode toward the door. The hinges creaked, the draft of winter air swept in, and then Richard's laughter followed. "There he is! Come in, come in!" Footsteps crossed the threshold. A tall figure appeared in the hallway, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that caught the candlelight like polished armor. His hair was styled with deliberate care, his jaw sharp, his smile easy. The kind of man who entered a room as though he owned it. "Everyone," Richard announced proudly, ushering him in with a clap on the back. "This is Dave." Dave stepped forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to admiration. His handshake with Richard was firm, his grin practiced. Eleanor rose slightly in her seat, her face alight. "So good to finally meet you," she said warmly, as if welcoming a long-lost relative. Marcus watched from his place at the table, silent. He felt the air shift, felt the room rearrange itself around this newcomer, as though he were a guest in his own home. Sarah froze, her wine glass tilted in her hand, nearly spilling. "Dave?" she repeated, her tone strained. "Yes, darling," Eleanor chimed. "Richard thought it would be wonderful for him to join us. Didn't want to tell you in advance. Thought a surprise might be nicer." "Nicer for who?" Marcus asked softly, his voice even but edged. No one acknowledged him. Dave moved further into the room, flashing that confident smile again. "Thank you for having me," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced, too polished for casual dinner talk. He extended his hand to Eleanor first, then to Olivia, who giggled as she shook it. "And Sarah." Richard gestured proudly, as though presenting a prize. "This is the one I've been telling you about." Marcus's gaze flicked to his wife. Sarah's face had gone pale beneath the flush of wine. She forced a smile, awkward, brittle. "Of course, Dave." Her voice cracked slightly, then steadied. "Welcome." Her hand lingered in his a second too long, or maybe Marcus only imagined it. Dave smiled at her, as though they were already acquainted. "Pleasure's mine." Richard guided him toward the table, pulling out the chair beside Sarah. "Sit, sit. Make yourself at home." Marcus's seat, Marcus noticed. He remained where he was, silent, watching. It was as if he'd vanished from their awareness. Richard didn't introduce him. Eleanor didn't so much as glance in his direction. Olivia leaned across the table, eyes shining with excitement, already whispering questions about Dave's work, his travels, his car. Dave answered smoothly, every word polished with ease. "Investment banking. Yes, I travel often. Geneva last month. New York before that. It keeps me busy, but I love the challenge." "Oh, impressive," Eleanor said, her voice warm, adoring. "You see," Richard boomed, looking around the table. "Now here's a man with drive, with ambition." Sarah swallowed hard, fingers tightening around her glass. "Dad," she began, her voice uncertain. But Richard waved her off, smiling broadly. "No, no, darling, hear me out. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. You deserve the best. And Dave, well, he's the kind of man any woman would be lucky to have." Marcus's knife clinked against his plate as he set it down with deliberate care. He didn't speak. He only observed, his calm face betraying none of the storm beneath. Eleanor leaned in, her tone conspiratorial. "You'll find Sarah is quite accomplished herself, Dave. She's brilliant, always has been. Sometimes I wonder how she manages with, well," her eyes flicked toward Marcus briefly, dismissive. "With everything." Dave nodded politely, his smile courteous. "I'm sure she is." Olivia laughed, brushing her hair back from her face. "You two even look good together. Don't they, Mum?" Sarah nearly dropped her glass. "Olivia," she snapped, then tried to soften it with a laugh. "You're drunk." Olivia smirked. "Not as much as you." The sisters' eyes clashed, sharp, but then Richard raised his glass again. "To Dave. Welcome to the family." Crystal clinked. Voices echoed. Marcus didn't move. He held his glass in his hand, but didn't raise it. He watched as they toasted a stranger, as their laughter rang louder than it had all night. He sat at his own table, surrounded by people who treated him as though he were a shadow. Sarah's hand trembled as she set her glass down. This is too much. You can't just relax, darling," Eleanor said smoothly. "It's Christmas. No need for dramatics. Dave shifted in his seat, discomfort flickering across his polished expression. He glanced toward Marcus then, as though realizing for the first time he hadn't been acknowledged. Their eyes met. Marcus inclined his head slightly, a gesture of polite greeting, though his expression remained unreadable. "Marcus," Richard said suddenly, almost as an afterthought. "This is Dave." "Dave Marcus." The introduction was tossed across the table like a crumb, careless and perfunctory. Dave nodded. "Pleasure to meet you." Marcus's lips curved faintly. "The pleasure is all mine." His voice was calm, so calm it drew a flicker of unease from Dave. But no one else noticed. The conversation surged on, sweeping Marcus to the margins. Olivia asked about Dave's favorite wines. Eleanor inquired about his family background. Richard bragged about the connections he could bring into the fold. Sarah sat stiff, sipping wine too quickly, her laughter coming in forced bursts. Marcus sat silent, his hands folded neatly before him, watching the strange scene unfold. His house, his table, his marriage, and yet he was invisible, a ghost among them. Chapter 6, The Replacement Revealed. The conversation had reached a strange, buoyant rhythm, with Eleanor and Olivia clinging to every word Dave offered, while Sarah sat rigid in her chair, sipping wine like it was medicine. Marcus, meanwhile, remained still. He cut into his food with quiet precision, letting the hum of voices pass over him like wind through trees. Richard's cheeks had reddened with wine and self-satisfaction. He leaned back in his chair, glass in hand, surveying the table like a general about to announce victory. His eyes lingered on Marcus for a moment, long enough to make the silence stretch before he stood. He tapped his knife against the rim of his glass. Clink, clink. The laughter at the table dwindled. All eyes turned to him. Richard raised his glass high, his voice booming. "A toast." Eleanor's face lit up. Olivia sat forward, smirking, already anticipating what was coming. Sarah shifted uneasily, her hand hovering over her glass, but not yet lifting it. Marcus calmly placed his fork down, folded his napkin once across his lap, and looked up. "To family," Richard began, "to tradition, and to new beginnings." Marcus tilted his head slightly, expression unreadable. Richard turned, his gaze sweeping proudly toward Dave. "Everyone, tonight I want to officially welcome this fine young man into our family. Dave isn't just a guest, he's the perfect man for Sarah after the divorce." The words landed like a hammer. For a moment, silence. Total, suffocating silence. Even the candles seemed to hold their breath. Sarah's wine glass slipped from her hand, clattering against the table, red liquid spilling like blood across the white linen. "What?" Her voice cracked. "Dad, what did you just say?" Eleanor beamed, as if Richard had delivered a line she had rehearsed with him. "Oh, darling, don't act so surprised. We all want what's best for you. And Dave, well, he's strong, ambitious, charming. Everything a woman could want." Sarah's jaw dropped, her eyes wide in horror. "Mom, you can't just—" She looked to Marcus, then away quickly, her breath shallow. Olivia smirked, twirling her fork idly. "Honestly, Sarah, it's not the worst idea. You two would make a good match. Marcus has served his purpose, hasn't he?" Marcus, without so much as a flinch, reached for the breadbasket. He selected a roll, placed it carefully on his plate, and began buttering it with slow, deliberate strokes. His expression was calm, almost serene. Dave shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the confident smile faltering. Excuse me?" His eyes darted around the table. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Richard declared, raising his glass higher. "Sarah deserves more than this stagnant marriage. She deserves someone who can elevate her life. And Dave, you're the man for the job." Sarah slammed her hands on the table. "Dad, stop it. You can't say that in front of—" She shot a glance at Marcus, her face pale, lips trembling. "You can't just—" Eleanor leaned forward, patting Sarah's arm like a scolding parent. "Darling, there's no need for dramatics. Marcus understands. Don't you, Marcus?" Marcus spread the butter across his roll, smooth and steady. He looked up briefly, eyes calm, then returned to his task. "How nice," he said quietly. The simplicity of his words cut sharper than any outburst could have. Eleanor blinked, momentarily thrown. Olivia snorted in her wine. Richard pressed on, determined to dominate the moment. "It's not personal, Marcus. You've been fine. But Sarah needs more than fine. She needs someone who matches her ambition. That's why we've all agreed Dave is the perfect fit." Sarah's breath hitched audibly. "We've all agreed? What the hell is this? You've been plotting this behind my back." Her eyes darted toward Dave, furious, panicked. "Did you know about this?" Dave raised both hands, palms out, visibly sweating now. "No, absolutely not. I was invited, that's all. I thought—" Richard said it was just dinner. His voice cracked under the weight of the room. "I didn't sign up for whatever this is." Olivia laughed lightly, stirring the pot with glee. "Oh, come on, Dave. Don't be shy. You and Sarah would be perfect together. Look at you, power couple material." Sarah whirled on her sister. "Olivia, shut up." Eleanor clucked her tongue. "Sarah, that's no way to speak to your sister. She's only being honest." The tension grew thick enough to choke on. Marcus took a bite of his buttered roll, chewing slowly, thoughtfully, as though savoring the taste. He set it down, wiped his fingers delicately on his napkin, and leaned back. Dave ran a hand over his jaw, looking more and more like a man who'd wandered into a lion's den. "Look, Richard, I respect you, but this isn't appropriate. You can't just introduce me like that. Sarah's still married. This is insane." "Not for long," Richard said with conviction. "The divorce will be quick, clean, and then divorce." Sarah's voice cracked, sharp with fury and disbelief. "You're talking about my marriage as if it's already over." She turned toward Marcus, guilt and panic flashing across her face. "Marcus, but Marcus didn't respond. He sipped his wine instead, his calm demeanor drawing all eyes back to him. The silence that followed stretched, taut as a wire. Marcus's calm was unsettling, terrifying even. They expected him to rage, to shout, to break. Instead, he sat there like stone, collected and unshaken. Richard cleared his throat, trying to fill the void. "Well, I suppose the truth always stings a bit. But in the end, everyone will see this is for the best." Sarah buried her face in her hands, shoulders trembling. Eleanor reached over to stroke her hair as though consoling a child. Olivia leaned back, smug satisfaction written all over her face. Dave shifted again, clearly regretting every decision that had led him to this dinner table. And Marcus? Marcus calmly reached for his roll again, spreading the last of the butter across it with quiet precision. The storm raged around him, words colliding, voices rising, but he remained untouched, the eye of the chaos. A ghost in his own marriage, yet the one man at the table who seemed utterly, undeniably in control. Chapter 7, Marcus Strikes Back. The table was chaos. Sarah's voice rose in broken protests. Eleanor clucked like a hen, trying to soothe her. Richard barked with the authority of a man who thought himself unshakable, and Olivia tossed in barbs as though they were garnish on a dish of cruelty. Dave shifted in his chair, clearly regretting every moment he remained seated. And Marcus chewed the last bite of his buttered roll. He dabbed his mouth with a napkin, folded it neatly, and set it beside his plate. Then, for the first time that evening, he cleared his throat. The sound was soft, but cut through the noise like a bell. They all stopped. When he finally spoke, his voice was low even. "I think we've had enough of this charade." Richard straightened, his glass halfway to his lips. "Excuse me." Marcus leaned back, his hands folded calmly before him. "You've spent the evening treating me like I'm already gone, like I don't exist. And yet, you've forgotten one small detail." His gaze flicked toward Sarah, then to Richard, then to Eleanor. "This is my house." A stunned silence fell. Marcus continued, his tone almost conversational. "Yes, mine. Title, deed, mortgage, every last bit of it. My name. Not Sarah's. Not yours. Richard, despite your tendency to behave like you own it. Mine." Eleanor blinked rapidly. "Well, that's hardly the point." "Oh, but it is the point," Marcus cut in smoothly. "Because when you stand in this dining room, you stand in a house that belongs to me, which makes tonight's little parade. He gestured lightly toward Dave. A rather bold performance on my property. Dave shifted in his seat again, suddenly very aware of the ground beneath his feet. Richard scoffed. So what? The divorce will sort all that out. Sarah will get her share. Marcus smiled faintly. That's where it gets interesting. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with something between panic and fury. Marcus don't. But he went on, his voice cutting like ice. You see, when we got married, Sarah and I signed an agreement. A prenuptial contract. Ironclad. Every clause, every safeguard locked tight. If she ever decided to walk away, his eyes settled on Sarah. She walks away with nothing. The words slammed into the room with the force of a hammer. Eleanor gasped. Olivia dropped her fork onto her plate with a clatter. Richard's face darkened, the flush of wine replaced by the red of anger. Sarah's lips trembled. That's not true. You wouldn't know, but it is true. Marcus's tone was calm, almost gentle, though the words were merciless. Your lawyer reviewed it. You signed it. Perhaps you thought it was meaningless at the time. But paper has memory, Sarah. Ink doesn't forget. Her hand went to her glass again, but she didn't drink. She simply held it, knuckles white, as though it might anchor her. Richard slammed his palm on the table, rattling the glasses. You can't hold her hostage with a piece of paper. Marcus turned his gaze on him. Hostage? No, but I can certainly hold her accountable for the vows she trampled. The air grew taut again, every breath heavy. But Marcus wasn't finished. You see, he said, his voice dropping into something colder, sharper. I'm not blind. I know about the secret account, Sarah, the one you've been funneling money into for the last year. Her head jerked toward him, her face draining of color. How I told you once, Marcus said softly. I noticed things. Eleanor sputtered. You must be mistaken. Sarah would never. Marcus cut her off with a quiet laugh. Hotel charges. Transfers, withdrawals, all linked. And Richard, his gaze pinned Sarah's father like a spear. Imagine my surprise when those hotel bills came back tied to your corporate card. The silence was absolute. Richard's mouth opened, then closed again. His eyes flickered, calculating, searching for footing that wasn't there. Marcus went on, steady and unrelenting. So either your daughter has been siphoning funds from your company, or you've been generously footing the bill for her extracurricular activities. Which is it, Richard? Fraud or charity? Olivia laughed, high and nervous, though the sound cracked in the middle. Oh, this is rich. Olivia, shut up, Sarah hissed, her voice breaking. But Marcus's gaze never wavered. He remained calm, relentless. I could have confronted you earlier. I could have shouted, raged, demanded answers. But I didn't. Because unlike you, I believe in timing. In this, he spread his hands across the table. The picture of composure is the perfect moment. Dave exhaled sharply, running a hand across his face. I really shouldn't be here. For once, Marcus said, almost kindly, we agree. Richard's jaw clenched. Eleanor pressed her napkin to her lips, as if she might faint. Sarah sat frozen, glass still clutched in her trembling hand, eyes wide and wet with disbelief. The family's smugness, the condescension, the mocking laughter, it all drained from the room, leaving only shock, fear, and the faint crackle of the fireplace. Marcus reached once more for his wine, raised it slightly, and took a slow sip. His voice was almost a whisper, but every word cut like glass. I know everything. Chapter 8, Family Collapse. The room had gone from tense to explosive in the space of a few words. Marcus's calm had become a blade, slicing through the illusions the family had built. Silence gave way to gasps, murmurs, and finally the chaotic noise of panic. Richard's face had gone an odd shade between crimson and pale, his eyes darting from Marcus to Sarah and back again. The confidence he had carried into the evening crumbled like brittle paper in a storm. You can't do this, he stammered, voice uneven, nearly spilling the wine in his hand. These are private matters. Internal company details. Marcus's expression remained unreadable, his fingers slowly drumming against the edge of the table. I know everything, Richard. Every transfer, every discrepancy. And I keep records. Richard swallowed hard. Records? What kind of records? Everything you hoped no one would see, Marcus said softly. Emails, statements, copies of receipts, video recordings, notes from every time you try to manipulate, to cover up. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide as if she might scream or faint. Richard, control this. You have to control this before people find out. Our reputation, our legacy, our standing. Richard shook his head violently. Control? I can't. I can't control this. Marcus has everything. Sarah sat frozen, her wineglass forgotten, tears welling in her eyes. She pressed her hands to her face, then looked at Marcus, hope and terror warring in her gaze. No, it can't be true. I didn't. Yes, you did, Marcus said quietly, precise, devastating. The accounts, the hotel charges, every withdrawal traced back to your father's corporate card. I've seen it all. Sarah's face crumpled. I know, I didn't mean, Marcus, please, I can explain. Her words trailed into stammered sobs, her body shaking, her composure completely gone. She slumped forward, tears dripping onto the pristine tablecloth, soaking the hem of her sleeve. Olivia, of course, was entirely unhelpful. She leaned back in her chair, smirking as she flicked her hair over her shoulder. Well, this is more fun than I expected, she said, voice sharp and teasing, as though she were watching a fire engulf someone else's house. Dad, how does it feel knowing your little empire's about to collapse? Eleanor gasped, reaching for Olivia's arm. Olivia, enough. Stop making it worse. But Olivia only grinned wider. Why? This is amazing. Marcus finally standing up for himself. Sarah, crying, and Dad. She pointed at Richard, turning 50 shades of red. I can't stop watching. Richard slammed his hand onto the table, rattling the glasses and silverware. Olivia, sit down, shut up. This is serious. Marcus remained seated, hands folded neatly in front of him. His calm was unnerving, a silent anchor amidst the storm. It is serious, Richard, he said, because I don't make idle threats. The evidence exists, and if anyone attempts to act on deceit, it will be revealed. Every transaction, every lie, it's all documented. Richard's breathing became uneven, his fists tightening around the edge of the table. You don't understand. If this gets out, I'm finished. Corporate board meetings, audits, lawsuits. They'll destroy me. Eleanor's voice became almost a whine. We worked so hard for everything. All the connections, the social standing, the appearances, everything. How could it unravel like this? Sarah's sobbing intensified. I didn't think, I never wanted this. Her words were barely coherent, fragments of guilt and denial colliding in a messy knot. Marcus, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Olivia's smirk faded slightly as she noticed her sister's genuine distress. Oh, come on. You played this game as much as Dad did. You can't cry now and act innocent. Olivia, Eleanor shrieked, covering her face with her hands. Stop. Enough. Dave, meanwhile, had been squirming in his seat for some time, clearly realizing he had been thrust into a nightmare he had no control over. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. I really think I should go, he said, voice tight with discomfort. I didn't sign up for this, any of this. Richard gaped at him. Go. You can't just leave. I think I can, Dave interrupted, grabbing his coat from the back of a chair. He took a tentative step toward the door, glancing back at Sarah, whose tears had blurred her face, and then at Marcus, who watched silently, an impenetrable calm surrounding him like a fortress. This is too much. Sarah's sobbing grew louder. No, stay. You can't leave now. She looked at Marcus, as though he could somehow control everything. Marcus simply watched. His presence was a counterweight to the chaos, silent and immovable. He didn't need to intervene. The storm had reached its peak. He allowed it to roll over them, each crash of panic and accusation reinforcing the truth. He had always been in control. Richard's hand shook. He leaned back in his chair, looking helpless for the first time in years. Eleanor pressed her napkin to her lips, as if she might faint. Sarah sat frozen, glass still clutched in her trembling hand, eyes wide and wet with disbelief. The family's smugness, the condescension, the mocking laughter, it all drained from the room, leaving only shock, fear, and the faint crackle of the fireplace. Marcus reached once more for his wine, raised it slightly, and took a slow sip. His voice was almost a whisper, but every word cut like glass. I know everything. Chapter 8, Family Collapse. The room had gone from tense to explosive in the space of a few words. Marcus's calm had become a blade, slicing through the illusions the family had built. Silence gave way to gasps, murmurs, and finally the chaotic noise of panic. Richard's face had gone an odd shade between crimson and pale, his eyes darting from Marcus to Sarah and back again. The confidence he had carried into the evening crumbled like brittle paper in a storm. You can't do this, he stammered, voice uneven, nearly spilling the wine in his hand. These are private matters. Internal company details. Marcus's expression remained unreadable, his fingers slowly drumming against the edge of the table. I know everything, Richard. Every transfer, every discrepancy. And I keep records. Richard swallowed hard. Records? What kind of records? Everything you hoped no one would see, Marcus said softly. Emails, statements, copies of receipts, video recordings, notes from every time you try to manipulate, to cover up. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide as if she might scream or faint. Richard, control this. You have to control this before people find out. Our reputation, our legacy, our standing. Richard shook his head violently. Control? I can't. I can't control this. Marcus has everything. Sarah sat frozen, her wineglass forgotten, tears welling in her eyes. She pressed her hands to her face, then looked at Marcus, hope and terror warring in her gaze. No, it can't be true. I didn't. Yes, you did, Marcus said quietly, precise, devastating. The accounts, the hotel charges, every withdrawal traced back to your father's corporate card. I've seen it all. Sarah's face crumpled. I know, I didn't mean Marcus, please, I can explain. Her words trailed into stammered sobs, her body shaking, her composure completely gone. She slumped forward, tears dripping onto the pristine tablecloth, soaking the hem of her sleeve. Olivia, of course, was entirely unhelpful. She leaned back in her chair, smirking as she flicked her hair over her shoulder. Well, this is more fun than I expected, she said, voice sharp and teasing, as though she were watching a fire engulf someone else's house. Dad, how does it feel knowing your little empire is about to collapse? Eleanor gasped, reaching for Olivia's arm. Olivia, enough. Stop making it worse. But Olivia only grinned wider. Why? This is amazing. Marcus finally standing up for himself. Sarah, crying, and Dad. She pointed at Richard, turning 50 shades of red. I can't stop watching. Richard slammed his hand onto the table, rattling the glasses and silverware. Olivia, sit down, shut up. This is serious. Marcus remained seated, hands folded neatly in front of him. His calm was unnerving, a silent anchor amidst the storm. It is serious, Richard, he said, because I don't make idle threats. The evidence exists, and if anyone attempts to act on deceit, it will be revealed. Every transaction, every lie, it's all documented. Richard's breathing became uneven, his fists tightening around the edge of the table. You don't understand. If this gets out, I'm finished. Corporate board meetings, audits, lawsuits. They'll destroy me. Eleanor's voice became almost a whine. We worked so hard for everything. All the connections, the social standing, the appearances, everything. How could it unravel like this? Sarah's sobbing intensified. I didn't think. I never wanted this. Her words were barely coherent, fragments of guilt and denial colliding in a messy knot. Marcus, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Olivia's smirk faded slightly as she noticed her sister's genuine distress. Oh, come on. You played this game as much as Dad did. You can't cry now and act innocent. Olivia, Eleanor shrieked, covering her face with her hands. "Stop! Enough!" Dave, meanwhile, had been squirming in his seat for some time, clearly realizing he had been thrust into a nightmare he had no control over. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. I really think I should go," he said, voice tight with discomfort. I didn't sign up for any of this." Richard gaped at him. "Go. You can't just leave." "I think I can," Dave interrupted, grabbing his coat from the back of a chair. He took a tentative step toward the door, glancing back at Sarah, whose tears had blurred her face, and then at Marcus, who watched silently, an impenetrable calm surrounding him like a fortress. This is too much." Sarah's sobbing grew louder. "No, stay. You can't leave now." She looked at Marcus, as though he could somehow control everything. Marcus simply watched. His presence was a counterweight to the chaos, silent and immovable. He didn't need to intervene. The storm had reached its peak. He allowed it to roll over them, each crash of panic and accusation reinforcing the truth. He had always been in control. Richard's hand shook. He leaned back in his chair, looking helpless for the first time in years. "Marcus, you don't know what you're doing. This will ruin us." Marcus tilted his head slightly, voice calm, cold, precise. "I do know what I'm doing. And the only ruin here is for those who thought they could manipulate, deceive, and plot in my house." Eleanor's voice rose to a pitch of desperation. "Richard, fix this. Take control. Do something." Richard's hands were empty. His authority had dissolved into panic. I don't know what to do." Sarah's sobs filled the room, each cry punctuating the collapse of her carefully maintained facade. She was trapped in the consequences of her own actions, her guilt and fear crashing over her like waves. Olivia leaned forward again, unable to resist stirring the chaos further. "Well, damn, Mom. Sarah, you all look awful. I haven't seen anything this entertaining since the time Marcus accidentally set fire to the toaster." Eleanor shrieked, slapping Olivia's hand away. "Shut up. You're making it worse." Dave took another step toward the door, coat slung over his shoulder, clearly calculating the quickest escape route. I really shouldn't be here. This isn't what I expected. I need to go." "Go," Sarah wailed, voice cracking. "Don't leave. Don't leave me here with them." Marcus, as always, remained still. His eyes swept the table once more, cataloging every word, every gesture, every faltering expression of fear and shame. He picked up his wineglass again, swirling it slowly, the motion deliberate. The family had crumbled. The smirks, the posturing, the arrogance, all of it lay in ruins at his feet. They were dominoes, toppled one by one, and Marcus's quiet precision had caused the first push. Dave lingered near the door, hesitant, caught between politeness and self-preservation. Richard's gaze followed him, desperate, pleading, impotent. Eleanor clutched her pearls as though they might shield her from the shame. Sarah was inconsolable, and Olivia was both thrilled and frustrated, unable to process the real terror she had helped to create. And Marcus? Marcus merely sat, the eye of the storm, untouched, observing, calculating, utterly in control. The family was in shambles. Chapter 9. Marcus walks away. The room had descended into chaos, a tornado of fear, guilt, and incredulity. Glasses rattled, wine had spilled, and the remnants of a Christmas meal were strewn across the table like casualties. Sarah sobbed, leaning heavily on the table. Eleanor clutched her pearls as if they could shield her from shame. Richard sat frozen, jaw tight, eyes wide in disbelief. Olivia leaned back in her chair, her smirk tinged with frustration and nervous excitement. Even Dave hovered near the door, coat in hand, desperate to remove himself from the spectacle. Marcus sat quietly, a serene figure amid the wreckage. He had finished his wine, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and set it down. He took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the room simmer in its own panic. No one noticed him at first. He didn't need to speak yet. The storm had been fully unleashed. Finally, he rose. The scrape of his chair against the floor was sharp in the stunned silence. "I'm done. Marcus said, voice calm but firm. He moved with measured steps toward the door, his gaze sweeping the table as though inspecting a scene he had long anticipated. Done with the lies. Done with the schemes. Done with being part of this charade. Sarah's head snapped up. Marcus, wait. Please. Don't do this. Her hands trembled as she reached toward him, voice frantic and broken. I can explain everything. We can please don't leave. He paused at the threshold, not out of hesitation but courtesy, letting her pleas wash over him. Explain? Sarah, it's too late for explanations. You and your family can destroy yourselves without me. Eleanor's lips parted, disbelief morphing into rage. Marcus, how dare you? You can't just leave. This is our family. Our tradition. She broke off, her voice cracking, fingers gripping the edge of the table as if physically restraining him. I've already done my part, Marcus said softly, almost kindly. I've exposed the truth. I've given clarity. Beyond that, I have no interest in participating in your chaos. Richard's jaw worked, words failing him. For once, he was speechless, staring at Marcus as though the man before him were some incorporeal force he couldn't comprehend. He tried to summon the authority that had guided him for decades, but it was gone, evaporated by Marcus's calm. Marcus, wait, Richard began, then faltered, voice catching in his throat. Olivia, as usual, couldn't resist a comment. Well, I'll be damned, she said, leaning back in her chair. Even when the house is burning around him, he's cool, like ice in a furnace. Dave, coat in hand, practically bolted. I think I'll go ahead, he said, stumbling toward the door. His hand shook on the doorknob. Yeah, I think I'll just get out of here. Sarah's voice rose again, desperate. Marcus, please. You can't leave me here with them. Don't abandon me. Her tears streamed freely now, and her sobs echoed in the room, a stark reminder of her vulnerability. Marcus looked at her, his eyes steady, unwavering. Sarah, he said quietly, you made your choices. You and your family can deal with the consequences. I've done what I needed to do. The rest is yours. He moved past the table, shoulders squared, head held high. Each step was deliberate, echoing softly against the hardwood floor. The sound was almost meditative in its clarity, a metronome marking the distance between him and the chaos he was leaving behind. Eleanor shrieked, rising from her seat. Marcus, don't you dare. We raised you. We welcomed you into this family. Marcus stopped for a heartbeat, just long enough to give her the weight of his gaze. Raised me? Welcomed me? That was a mistake. Then he turned, continuing toward the door. Richard's voice cracked like dry wood in a storm. Marcus, think of the consequences. Think of the scandal, the shame, the embarrassment. Think of... Marcus paused, but only to look over his shoulder once more. His expression was calm, resolute. I've thought of it. That's why I'm leaving. Because none of it belongs to me. The room seemed to shrink, the temperature dropping as if Marcus's composure carried its own weight. He reached the door, hand on the knob, and glanced back. The tableau before him was grotesque in its unraveling. Sarah crying, Eleanor trembling with rage, Richard frozen in fear, Olivia alternating between mockery and uncertainty, Dave retreating in panic. Marcus exhaled slowly. I've spent 15 years giving everything I had to this marriage. 15 years maintaining a home, a life, a family. And tonight, it's clear none of that mattered to you. He turned the knob. The door swung open. The cold night air whispered into the room, brushing against Sarah's tear-streaked cheeks, rustling Eleanor's hair, and catching the edge of Olivia's smirk. Marcus stepped into the hallway. One last look. One final sweep of the scene he had endured for far too long. This is yours now, he said softly. All of it. With that, he stepped out into the night. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound final, irrevocable. Inside, the room remained frozen. Sarah leaned forward, head in hands, the wine glass rolling forgotten across the table. Eleanor muttered under her breath, furious, shaking her fists as though she could summon him back. Richard's mouth opened, closed, and opened again, producing no sound. Olivia blinked, her smirk faltering as reality sank in. He had left them entirely, unshaken, unbothered. Dave, finally realizing he wasn't part of this household battle, practically bolted for the stairs, muttering apologies over his shoulder. The sound of his departure echoed in the empty room like a punctuation mark. Sarah whispered, voice cracked and ragged, "Marcus, please," but there was no answer. The family had been left to stew in the wreckage of their own making. Shattered pride, exposed lies, and the bitter taste of hubris meeting its match. Outside, Marcus walked steadily, each step carrying the weight of freedom. The night was cold, yes, but it was clean and unclaimed. He inhaled the crisp air, letting it fill his lungs, filling the spaces where tension and betrayal had once resided. Behind him, the chaos raged, but he carried none of it. He had dismantled the illusions, survived the storm, and now, finally, he could move forward on his own terms. He walked past the streetlights, their glow reflecting faintly in the snow-dusted sidewalk. Each step was resolute, a rhythmic departure from 15 years of confinement. He felt the cool wind on his face, the solid earth beneath his feet, and a sense of peace settling over him. Not vengeance, not anger, just freedom. The sounds of the house behind him, Sarah's cries, Eleanor's rage, Richard's panic, Olivia's mocking laughter, faded into the background. They were left to face their own ruin, their own tangled web of deceit, all while Marcus moved toward clarity, calm, and a life no longer dictated by their manipulations. The cold night embraced him like an old friend. He kept walking. Chapter 10, Final Closure. The night was cold, crisp, and still, carrying the faint smell of winter snow and distant pine. Marcus stepped away from the house, the door clicking shut behind him like the final punctuation on 15 years of entanglement. For the first time in years, he felt the absence of tension as a presence of peace. The chaos inside, the shouting, the crying, the mockery, the desperation was left behind, sealed within the walls of the house he had once called home. He drew in a deep breath, letting it fill his lungs and escape slowly, exhaling not only the cold air, but the accumulated weight of betrayal, neglect, and manipulation. Each step across the frost-dusted sidewalk felt deliberate, measured, deliberate as meditation. There were no more schemes, no more lies, no more pretenses to maintain. He was free. The quiet was profound. Streetlights cast long, golden reflections across the asphalt, the shadows of bare trees stretching like fingers across the snow. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The air was sharp, biting at his cheeks, but invigorating. His mind, once crowded with tension and suspicion, felt expansive, clear, open. A sudden sound, a soft shuffle behind him, made him pause. The night held its breath with him. He turned slowly, expecting perhaps some lingering member of the family. Another scene of confrontation. It was Richard. The man approached cautiously, hands partially raised in a gesture of surrender. His tailored jacket was wrinkled, his ties slightly loose, and his face bore the colorless pallor of shock and remorse. The pomp and certainty he had carried through every holiday gathering was gone. Now there was only humility, vulnerability, and something that Marcus recognized as respect. "Marcus!" Richard's voice was low, careful. He stopped a few feet away, the gap between them almost symbolic, a measure of distance that could not yet be bridged by words alone. I came to apologize." Marcus inclined his head slightly, but said nothing. He continued to stand in the cold, letting Richard choose his words carefully. Richard swallowed. "For everything. For Sarah, for Eleanor, for Olivia, for myself. I underestimated you. We all did. You've handled yourself with more grace, more intelligence, and more strength than any of us ever gave you credit for." He paused, taking a deep breath, as if he were trying to summon the right words to capture years of pride and regret. Marcus said nothing, only observed. His calm was unwavering, a silent reminder that no apology could erase the past, but acknowledgement could offer a form of respect. Richard reached into his pocket, hesitating for a long beat. Then he pulled out a small, leather-bound keychain. On it hung a single brass key. He extended it toward Marcus with a trembling hand. "For the beach house," Richard said quietly. I want you to have it. Consider it a gesture of respect, of acknowledgement, a twisted apology, perhaps, but sincere. You've earned it." Marcus's eyes flicked to the key, then back to Richard. He remained silent, letting the moment exist without embellishment. The gesture was unnecessary, yet significant, a symbol not of entitlement, but of final closure, a token of respect from a man who had finally recognized the depth of Marcus's strength. Richard exhaled shakily. I don't know what else to say. Just thank you, I suppose. And I'm sorry for everything." Marcus reached out slowly, taking the key from Richard without a word. He held it for a moment, turning it over in his palm, feeling the weight of its meaning. It was more than metal. It was freedom, acknowledgement, and a tangible marker of a life he could now claim for himself. Richard nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Go, make your life yours, Marcus. Truly yours." With that, he turned and walked back toward the house, back into the shadows of the chaos he had created, leaving Marcus alone with the night. Marcus looked down at the key again, then slipped it into his pocket. It was a quiet, private victory, one he didn't need to announce or justify. He had won, not by shouting, not by confrontation, but by enduring, observing, and acting with precision when the time came. The wind whispered around him, carrying the scent of pine, distant smoke from chimneys, and the faint tang of sea air from beyond the town. Marcus adjusted his coat, shoulders squared, and began walking again. Each step was purposeful, a rhythm of liberation, echoing softly in the stillness. As he moved down the street, he allowed himself to reflect, not on revenge, not on the family left behind, but on the life he would now shape on his own terms. For the first time, the burdens of expectation, of manipulation, and of betrayal had been lifted. The night was quiet, the world open, and he felt the rare, exhilarating taste of absolute freedom. Snow began to fall lightly, catching in his hair and dusting his shoulders like a benediction. Marcus kept walking, letting the flakes settle, letting them remind him that even the smallest things, the cold, the quiet, the simple sensation of moving through the world unbound, could feel like triumph. He passed familiar landmarks. The corner store, dark and shuttered. The old oak tree that had survived decades of storms. The small park where he had once taken Sarah and Olivia for winter walks. Each step carried him further from the chaos of the past and closer to a horizon of his own choosing. Somewhere behind him, faint voices carried on the wind. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. The family would continue their conflicts, their regrets, and their petty arguments. They would stew in the aftermath of their own making. That was theirs to endure. Marcus's world now belonged only to him. The streetlights stretched into the distance, guiding him like silent sentinels. Marcus's pace was steady, unwavering. The cold bit at his cheeks, but it felt refreshing, invigorating, even a reminder that he was alive, present, and finally unchained. After a while, he reached a bend in the road, where the street opened onto the distant shoreline. The moon hung low, silver and calm, casting pale light across the frosted sand. Marcus paused, looking out over the quiet waves, the water moving with a rhythm that mirrored his own sense of balance and liberation. He placed his hands in his pockets, feeling the key nestled against his side, a symbol of all he had endured and all he now possessed. The horizon stretched before him, vast and unclaimed, and he felt a profound sense of closure settle over his chest. Not triumph born of anger, not revenge born of spite, but calm, resolute, absolute closure. The night held no judgment, no expectation, only the quiet acknowledgement of a man finally free. Marcus took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill his lungs one last time, and then exhaled slowly, letting the past drift behind him. With the key in his pocket, the night at his back, and the future stretching out before him, Marcus stepped forward along the shore. The snow crunched softly under his feet, the waves whispered to the sand, and the stars reflected faintly on the water surface. He walked, steady, unhurried, and finally at peace.